Okay, let's open in a word of prayer. Lord, thank you for this day. We pray that you'll bless our time together. Pray that the subjects we discuss will be edifying, and bless our time together. In Jesus' name, amen. And now I need to do this. I sent Brian a title slide, but I did not do one for myself. It's very complicated. Okay, here we go. Trending Now is the title slide. A lot of things going on this week. So this week I'm going to do a little sort of cultural U.S. Then I will do geopolitics. A lot of things going on there. Maybe not necessarily related along the lines that you would normally think. Then I'm going to talk about specifically some things regarding Israel and the Middle East. And finish up with something that I think will be both troubling and uplifting. And I'm going to spend about 15 minutes on that, just so you know. And so if you want to fast forward to the last 15 minutes, feel free to do so. But then you will be missing out on a lot. The best stuff is at the beginning. Or is it at the end? Well, I don't know. You'll have to be the judge of that. So, and so I have some scriptures at the end. I'm going to put the things that I have at the end. So we talk each week. This is some of the other platforms that we're on. I don't think I uploaded to Remnant Truth Network last week. I'll try to get those uploaded. It gets very difficult to, I keep getting emails from people, be on Telegram and Gab and go back to Parler. And I mean, there's like 5 or 6 or 7 social media platforms. And, we only have a staff of 40 here at FBC to handle things. Sometimes we only have 40 here at FBC, 40 people on Sunday. So somebody once wrote to me and said, how many people on staff do you have to help you do your PowerPoints? And I'm like, I have a wife that lets me go down to my office and do them. That's the most important one. So we talk each week about the convergence of the events. We do live in a world that is very, very disruptive. It does appear that we're nearing the end time, in the sense that that doesn't mean the world is over. It means the Lord will return and set up his kingdom. And there's probably a 7-year period at least in that process before he does return and set up his kingdom. But so here's just some things that I want to share with you today. This is from the White House webpage, a transcript of President Biden. It says, "Thank you, Kamala, Madam Vice President. Thank you very much." So he does remember who the Vice President is. But in here, what he says this was when he did his proposal on gun control legislation. Now, one thing I'm pretty certain about is that there's no provision in the New Testament or Old Testament that we're supposed to have rights to have guns. However, we live in a sovereign nation that made that determination a long time ago. So when I hear people say, well, Christians, if the president wants to take your guns away, you shouldn't fight it. That would be the Christian thing to do. But the verse says in Romans, I'm preparing a talk for Last Days Bible Conference in Canada on the subject of we ought to obey God rather than men. But if the scripture says, and this is the problem I have, for example, I know people who say that everybody involved in the American Revolution was in sin, that was a Christian because they were rising up against the king. But I don't know that that's true, because the verse says, let every soul be subject to the higher powers, right? Well, what if your local government says we should rise up against the king, or we should oppose the king, or we should do this? And so this becomes a very big problem in a federal system. Which one are you going to assign the divine right of kings to? So my view is that in the United States, at least, they're all subject to a thing called the Constitution. And the Constitution does make certain provisions. So therefore, I think it's okay for churches to challenge the government. Now, we need to do that in an orderly, godly way. not like certain aspects of our culture that are tearing down cities and burning federal buildings and that type of thing, which never seem to get talked about. So, but the interesting thing about Biden's comment was that no amendment of the U.S. Constitution is absolute. In other words, listen, the way I interpret that is he is taking on himself the divine, what he would call the divine right of kings, to do whatever he wants. I have a big problem with that because he is subject in our system to a constitution just like I am subject to the Constitution and the laws that are properly enacted thereunder. So I think it's an issue that the church needs to wrestle with and discuss. Not everybody's going to come to the same conclusion, but I don't think that challenging tyrannical people who are acting outside of their God-given authority is wrong. Now, we can have a big, long discussion about that, but I hear this discussed, as I said, people saying that the people at the time of the revolution were all in sin. I don't agree with that because there were local people who had made a determination that people would have been subject to. So that's for another discussion, and I'm sure I'll get some hate mail on that. And those all go to Pastor Charles at FBC. Well, no, I think it's Department of Corrections at fbchapel.com. If we ever get that email set up. So let's just talk about a few things, culture, and then some other things. Now, this is an article from the Philadelphia Inquirer. And there were 5 female legislators in Pennsylvania who introduced legislation to ban people born male, now claiming to be female, from participating in female athletic sports in Pennsylvania. Similar legislation has been introduced in Arkansas. Governor H. Hutchinson, a Republican, vetoed that legislation the other day. I saw an interview with him on Tucker Carlson. If you want to watch a politician do an absolutely pathetic, wimpy defense of his position, go watch that interview. You can find it online. I won't torture you with it here. He did a terrible job. So, look, the good news is he's term limited. He can't run for governor again, and the legislature overrode his veto. That's why it's nice that in a lot of these state legislatures, I think Ohio, we have a veto-proof majority. They overrode a governor's veto recently. Governor doesn't get to decide what the absolute in-law is. That's left up to the legislatures, right? So, by logic, some people that argue that the revolution was sin, are they saying the legislators sinned because they overrode the governor's veto? Really need to be a little bit more circumspect. So here, this is also related. The other morning, Grace Life Church in Edmonton, Alberta, Canada, about 13 cop cars and trucks, in addition to a bunch of trucks, showed up at Grace Life Church outside of Edmonton, erected a fence, a double fence in some areas, put up the banting so you couldn't see through the fence, changed the locks on the church, padlocked the fence, and said, you're not able to meet anymore because you've been violating our rules. So again, I'm going to save most of my comments for my talk in Canada, and pray for me as I work on that, because I will be honest with you, I'm really wrestling with it. I think we live at an interesting time. I think we are allowed to challenge. I mean, they have a freedom of religion clause. In Canada, there's also a law in Canada that says people can't interfere with a religious worship service. And it doesn't say except the health administrator, they get to override the law. I don't see that. I even remember in Scripture, if I recall, that Paul appealed to Caesar, did he not? Was he sinning when he did that? No, it didn't. Now, did it save his life? No, didn't. But he used those opportunities to effectively present the gospel. My understanding is that when Pastor Coates from this Grace Life Church left jail after 35 days there, the prisoners cheered because he had been so gracious to share the gospel of Jesus Christ and teach and disciple them. He redeemed the time. So I think we need to look at that. But I'm deeply troubled by this. Now, look, this isn't persecution like what's going on in China. Have you heard what's going on in China? Mobile torture units are being used on church people, house churches. They are making them renounce their faith. They're torturing them, sometimes for over a month at a time, depriving them of food, sleep, that type of thing. So, Major League Baseball and Coke, you know, Georgia is bad because Georgia requires a voter ID, similar to the ID that you have to show to get on a Delta flight. Coke is a big sponsor of the Beijing Olympic Games that are coming up. They're torturing Christians. Okay, Coke, now's the time to speak up what really matters to you. Or are you just putting on a show for your woke masters? I suspect that it's the latter. So listen, the fact that this goes on, that we have to discuss, is troubling to me, but I think it's things that people need to be aware about. So again, this does not rise to that level. It doesn't rise to the level of the people who were beheaded by Islamic terrorists in Mozambique recently. You can actually find that video online. I recommend that you not go looking for it. But the church is under severe persecution in many places. And the good news is, in many places such as Iran, where it is under persecution, it's growing and thriving. And I've showed you videos of a church that was meeting in one of the Middle Eastern countries. Very, very encouraging. Meeting at a service with a PowerPoint and screen and audio for worship music. It was just like we would do here. It's very, very interesting. But people there had fled other countries because they were under severe persecution. So understand that I think this is coming. And the question will be, are churches going to continue doing what they do? Are they going to follow Hebrews and assemble together, particularly as we see the day approaching? I think that's very important. I think it's overlooked by a lot of people. Here's this story from the Wall Street Journal. China is creating a digital currency, the first one for a major economy. I do think this eventually plays into the end time scenarios on Mark of the Beast and currency and buying and selling. So that all those elements that will eventually be used by the beast, by the Antichrist, when he gets here, or when the false prophet gets here to help set up that system, are being put in place. All the rudimentary aspects of it. Now, what all we see going on right now, that this is exactly the way the mark of the beast is going to play out. Particularly, I don't see any worship aspect yet that accompanies it. But I see videos, people saying this is the mark of the beast. I saw one just this morning. I woke up to get a drink of water, and this video, I looked at my phone, and this video popped up, and so I woke up at 1 a.m. and didn't go back to sleep because I was a little bit troubled by the way the person approached the topic. If you're taking the vaccine, you're taking the mark of the beast. This is what it said. I have a problem with that. Where's the beast? It's called the mark of the beast. Now, what's going on, a precursor to that? I don't have any doubt that it is. But I also saw somebody sent me a video the other day where somebody was talking about barcodes on your food and how that will be the mark of the beast. So what the mark of the beast has been everybody latches onto something. Remember when those employees got microchipped in Wisconsin about 4 years ago? Everybody said, this is it, there's the mark of the beast, there it is. Well, I don't think that's really gotten a lot of traction. You don't need those chips now to track everybody, to be honest with you. I mean, Amazon's tracking their people in their delivery vans, and they admitted they were catching them taking restroom breaks in the van because they didn't have, Amazon said they didn't have time to do it elsewhere. So nevertheless, it's something that we need to be very careful about. There's also a number of articles this week. I talked about them. I played a clip of Naomi Wolf, who I probably disagree with her on 90% of things, but I think she's right on this particular issue that these vaccine passports are very troublesome from a liberty standpoint, from a constitutional liberty standpoint. I agree with her that if they are instituted on a wide scale, even by private companies, it will mark the end of liberty because it's going to be tied into the social credit system. And I have a talk at the Canada conference that'll air in about 3 weeks, 2 weeks, like 2.5 weeks, called Deplatforming Humanity, where I will talk about that because it'll be integrated with the social credit system. The technology's still not there. Everybody's still kind of fighting about it. Now, I recommend, I'm not going to spend much time on this just because of time, but there's a guy on the internet that if you're a relatively strong person, not easily troubled by things, it's Ice Age Farmer is his name, is this channel. And he does a pretty good job of analyzing the food supply, what is going on there. Folks, we're in a very difficult situation. The stock market is roaring. It's going crazy. But to be honest with you, so the stock market is up 50%. Does anybody really believe when the economy is shut down that the companies that are operating in that economy, they're worth 50% more than they were a year ago? No, it's because of all the fake money that's been pumped into the system has to go someplace. And there are anomalies. Housing prices are going up, but commodity prices are going up. Lumber is up, I heard, 250%. Somebody said they went to, where was the article I read? So they went to Home Depot. They didn't even have any plywood. But it was like, I think it might be cheaper to buy gold than a sheet of plywood. Steel is up, lumber, food prices are up, and yet the government always produces these reports that say, well, inflation is 2%. Oh, really? Have you bought gas since you shut down the fracking in the U.S.? So Ice Age Farmer did a very good thing. He looked at Amtrak and he looked at the infrastructure bill that Biden is proposing for the United States. What is it, $2.1 trillion? About 10% of that would be what we would consider to be traditional infrastructure, like buildings, roads, bridges, tunnels, that sort of thing. Now, did you know that Grandma and Grandpa, well, I don't have any anymore, but I guess I would be in that category, but your infrastructure now, this is a boondoggle. And what they want to do is there's a whole, you can download it from UK Fires. It's about net zero, getting everything to net zero. This is to collapse the economy and make it completely under the totalitarian control of these little dictators in Washington, D.C. One of the proposals there is billions of dollars for Amtrak to expand its system. And when you look at the maps, like here's the Amtrak, and they came out with a press release, we're going to expand. Like the expanding rail system in California went really well. They couldn't even build it out in the flat Central Valley and stay within budget. And now they're going to do this all over the country, and they're going to be these rail corridors that are going to connect everybody. They also have wind farm projects, and you'll see sort of a correlation between, see where there's sort of hubs for the Amtrak system, and then the wind farms sort of track the same, they sort of fit in the same area of the hubs. They're devoting under this plan, 38 million acres of the United States to wind farms. Now, let me make a comment. I'm not supporting Bill Gates. If anybody says that I am, you are a liar, okay? But I'm concerned that sometimes he's misrepresented. He does seem to want to be involved in everything. But I heard somebody say Bill Gates owns 250,000 acres, 250,000 acres of U.S. farmland. Some of it in Ohio, just 15 minutes west of downtown Columbus. I heard somebody on a prophecy-related show say, Bill Gates owns over half the farmland in the United States now. Now, folks, I know people that own 5,000 acres of farmland. So if 250,000 is over half, there are not many farms. The truth of the matter is Bill Gates owns 250,000 acres, and he is the largest single individual farmland owner in the United States. But in the United States, you can look it up, there are 900 million acres of farmland, so Bill Gates owns 0.0028. It's either 0.028% or 0.0028%. So like a couple hundredths or a couple thousandths of 1% of the farmland in the United States. Now look, he's very influential, he has a lot of money, he sends it around, and he is involved in all these things to kind of push everything to this net zero, and this is a totalitarian takeover of the economy. Make no mistake about it, this has nothing to do with infrastructure. It should be called the Restructure Act from the Biden administration. This is happening in country after country after country around the world. All of them are doing the same thing. They do all seem to be operating from a script. This was a picture of a rally recently. I don't remember the city. Dump coal, you see the sign. The other one, there's a big earth there. It said, and somebody holding up a sign there in the lower foreground, respect your mother. This is Gaia worship. This is what's really going on. And when you look at who's behind these infrastructure things, this is a list of people in the UK report about net zero, Imperial College of London, University of Bath, Atkins, Anglo-American, University of Oxford, University of Cambridge, University of Nottingham, et cetera, et cetera. These are the people who are backing that. Here's just a little graphic from the Epoch Times about the things that are in Biden's restructuring plan. It shouldn't be called infrastructure plan. It should be called restructuring and collapsing the economy plan. And these graphics you're showing up, you see all these different areas of the world that are important, and you can get this, the mega regions in the United States, and they show how they have all these great graphics. You can find out, connect to a lot of this at Ice Age Farmer. Now, one of the other things that Gates has proposed is that they're going to send up these balloons, and they're going to spread particles in the atmosphere to reflect the sun so that it will cool everything. Now, I don't understand, because there are carbon particles that go up into the air, but that causes the earth to warm, but they're not blocking the sun or anything. So they're going to take balloons or planes up to 5 miles above, 12 miles up, 60,000 feet, and spread this around the world. And that's going to cool everything, and everything will be okay. Well, not so quickly. In Sweden, they found out about this, and they said, no. This, we don't know what are the consequences of this. In other words, like, maybe we should think it through, Bill Gates and others who support this. I'm like, you never thought your operating system through because you developed a plan for viruses to spread, but that's another topic for another minute, day, hour, week. But here's an article. Now, this will violate one of my fundamental basic principles about citing anything from a Michigan university. This is an article from Michigan State University titled, potential ecological impacts of climate intervention by reflecting sunlight to cool Earth. And so these scientists at Michigan State did a great job. You can download the article. It's a little bit academic in its language, but it has cool pictures, so it's a little easier to understand. So what they did was they did a projection of what would happen if we didn't do anything. What would the world look like? So if they don't do anything, the Earth's going to warm on the left. On the right, one of the big issues is the ocean becoming more acid and affecting plant and sea life, which, by the way, that's part of Bible prophecy too. But so on the top row, they do nothing. That's what it looks like in the 2060s. It's always interesting that the predictions are always made at a time period after everybody alive today is dead. Which is great, because I love talking about the 2080s. Like, I'm going to make it to the 2080s. It's week to week whether I make it to the 2030s, right? Day to day. I mean, do any of you know your exit date, by the way? If it's other than rapture. You don't even know that date. So always be ready. But down below is if they spread everything in the sky. And you can see that they did cool the Earth by their projections, but what did it do with ocean acidification? Nothing. And so they say, thus, many questions remain unanswered. If we could avoid a hothouse Earth, instead achieve a stabilized Earth by deliberately manipulating Earth's climate system, while also working to minimize GHG emissions, do the risks of climate intervention for humans and ecological systems outweigh the possible benefits? I think they need to contact the English department at Michigan State University to help them structure their sentence a little bit better. But nevertheless, they say if we do that, there may be a whole host of bad things that happen, which is, yeah, that's what's going to happen. Speaking of change, as someone who works in commercial real estate, office buildings may stay empty, straining cities. In Manhattan, the value of office towers have plummeted 25%. The tax revenue is down, way down. I don't think it ever comes back to what it was before. So if you're a church congregation, go look out some commercial real estate, warehouse space. You may have the basic structure of your building all ready to go. And the good thing in the United States is it's never on the tax rolls either, so it doesn't help the city, but the real estate is there. This article from the New York Times, Intelligent Reports warns pandemic is chipping away at the world order. It's always interesting when the New York Times, other secular agencies look at this stuff and they say, yep, it does look like the world is crumbling a bit. Now, this is a report that's published every 3 to 5 years by the United States government, the National Intelligence Council under the Department of Homeland Security. This report was just released recently, Global Trends 2040. What they do is they look 20 years into the future. So the report that was published in 2017 looked at what the world was going to look like in 2035. So it takes a 20-year look at the trends. It's very interesting when you look at this to see how some of these things line up with Bible prophecy. I looked at the one from 2017. I also looked at ones from earlier in the 2000s. Every one of them mentioned pandemics. Do you know that? Because this is something that humanity has always had to deal with. How are we going to do with pandemics? So now, that doesn't mean that, I'm agnostic on whether this one was carefully planned out or people took advantage of it. I'm leaning more towards When it started to come about, people took advantage of it. But look at what some of the language in this says. Global Trends 2040, a more contested world. They look at different trends. Here's the table of conducts, structural forces, demographics, and human development. That's something I've been talking about. I don't think that's been in the prior Global Trends reports that have been published by our government. Scenarios for 2040, renaissance of democracies, a world adrift, competitive coexistence. So look, don't tell me I'm always the negative guy. I'm hopeful that Jesus is coming back and cleaning this mess up. I'm the optimist. But this is where the world is. I mean, people are really struggling for hope. So we need to give them the hope that we have. That in Christ you have hope. And if you're not in Christ, you don't. It's like on the transgender issue. Pretty clear what the Bible teaches and what we should stand for and what we should do. I'm not the one denying science. My Bible says God created them male and female. I look around, it looks like that's what God did. And when I see someone struggling with transgenderism, I have compassion for the struggles that they're going through. But I don't know, I think I heard someone say this. Maybe I dreamt it. Every Republican, governor, legislature, congressperson, executive branch person who stands for the genital mutilation of children needs to quit. Go back home and get a real job. To stand for the destruction of children's bodies is just unforgivable, particularly if you claim to be a Christian. Okay. Disequilibrium, the scale of transnational challenges and the emerging implications of fragmentation are exceeding the capacity of existing systems and structures, highlighting the third theme, disequilibrium. There is an increasing mismatch at all levels between challenges and needs with the systems and organizations to deal with them. The international system, including the organizations, alliances, rules, and norms, is poorly set up to address the compounding global challenges facing populations. What will their solution to that be, though? Let's get somebody who's really charismatic and lead us out of this mess. Let's introduce more control into the system. That's China. It also talks about, this is from 2017, Paradox of Progress. This is what the report said 4 years ago. We are living in a paradox. The achievements of the industrial and information ages are shaping a world to come that is both more dangerous and richer with opportunity than ever before. Whether promise or peril prevails will turn on the choices of humankind. The progress of the past decades is historic, connecting people, empowering individuals, groups, and states, and lifting 1 billion people out of poverty in the process. But this same progress also spawned shocks like the Arab Spring, the 2008 global financial crisis, and the global rise of populist anti-establishment politics. And now what they add is they had yet another problem that's emerged, is the problem with the virus. The pandemic and corresponding national responses appear to be honing and accelerating several trends that were already underway before the outbreak. COVID-19 brought global health and healthcare issues into sharp relief, exposed and in some cases widened social fissures, underscored vast disparities in healthcare and access and infrastructure, and interrupted efforts to combat other diseases. All true. The pandemic also highlighted weaknesses in the international coordination on health crises and the mismatch between existing institutions, funding levels, and future health challenges. It's reinforced nationalism and polarization. That's a bad thing to the globalists. Highlighting failed international cooperation. You know, what we really need is we need a great reset to correct all these problems, right? And that's what they're doing. That's what they're pushing. So whether they planned all this or it's just the world that we live in, the world that God has allowed to exist at this time in history and prophetic history, there are people that are going to take advantage of that. There is one person who's going to rise to really take advantage of that. A couple of them. Highlighting failed international cooperation. Down here further in the paragraph says the World Health Organization, which has faced significant funding difficulties and resistance to mandatory surveillance programs. Mandatory surveillance regimes is facing its gravest shock in nearly 2 decades. It also says that what's going on right now is elevating the role of non-state actors. This is, by the way, Facebook, YouTube. This comes from the Global Trends Report produced by our government. So if you think this needs to be censored, you go talk to them and have them take it off the internet. I'm only reporting to you the facts of what they said. Elevating the role of non-state actors. Non-state actors, ranging from the Gates Foundation to private companies. Why would they specify the Gates Foundation? Have been crucial to vaccine research or retrofitting equipment to mass-produce medical supplies and personal protective equipment. Non-state networks will complement national and intergovernmental action in future health crises, including early warning treatment, facilitation of data sharing, and vaccine development. That's what they see as the trend. And I know people who talk about that and they get blocked on Facebook. The other thing that they talk about, and I've talked a lot about this, is demographics. The demographics of the world are changing. The population in the West is aging. For example, here is a graph at the bottom that shows the age distribution. 2020, what it currently looks like in Europe, like under 15 is 16%, and 2040 will be under 15%. Aging population over 65 will go from 18.8% of the population to 26% of the population. By and large, outside of Hollywood and certain elite places, old people don't have babies. This is the trend that's happening. Here's a world debt to GDP ratio. You can see that back when this was 2007 at the top, red is the more towards the red spectrum, the worse your GDP is. So look at what it was in 2007, before the 2008 global financial crisis. Now go down to the bottom one and see how it's changed in just 12 years. That's not good, however you stretch it. So red is 74 to 100% of GDP, and you can see a significant amount of the world has changed dramatically. Now, China's changed. Russia doesn't seem to have changed. I'm not sure we're getting accurate data out of Russia, but that's another subject for later. Another thing they talk about is we live in a hyper-connected world. What's the global trend that they want to do? They want to make it more hyper-connected with these vaccine passports and other things tying in the social credit system. Also talks about the effect of artificial intelligence and how that is going to be changing. And when you get up above a certain line, you match or exceed human capability and intelligence. So it's something to be concerned about. It talks about outlook for international norms. You can get the report. You can download it at the National Intelligence Council Department of Homeland Security report, Global Trends 2040. Also talks about changes in fighting. Seth Frantzman from the Jerusalem Post has a new book coming out in June, I think, on drones and how that's changing warfare. We saw some evidence of that just this week, that drone availability is changing conflicts because it flattens out who can fight in these conflicts at a much cheaper cost. An aircraft carrier is much more expensive than 10,000 drones. You get 10,000 drones, you can overwhelm a lot of air defense systems. So it goes on. So I'm going to forego, I was going to talk about this week, but this is major power rivalry in the Middle East. This is the world that we live in. This is the Global Council for Foreign Relations, which I'm no fan of. They have people, though, who are conservative in that group. But they're talking about the Middle East. I mean, I don't think they have released a report called Major Power Rivalry in Southeast and Oceania, or Micronesia. It does seem that the area of the world that really draws the focus of these organizations is the Middle East. If I have time at the end, I'll go back and I'll talk about this great report about the next war in the North, published by the INSS, the Israeli National Security Studies Group from Tel Aviv University. I would recommend their website, inss.co.il. They have English and Hebrew language. And this report talks a lot about the things that are going to go on. There are a bunch of different scenarios for the war in the north of Israel, to the north of Israel, or in the north of Israel. This does have Bible prophecy implications because we have passages in scriptures that talk about, guess what? War in the north of Israel, in the mountains of Israel. So Israeli military and security people are talking about it. The Bible talks about it, so why shouldn't we talk about it? So I'll deal more with it. There's a great Jerusalem Post magazine a week ago talked about the Israeli army and how this army is being trained differently than other armies that the Israeli Defense Forces have had to deal with these trends that we saw back here in the spectrum of conflict from global trends. The IDF is not, they're not stupid, they're very smart, highly intelligent, and they're preparing. And so they're looking at these trends. INSS, other security agencies, that think tanks are also looking at these things, is how, particularly a nation like Israel, which seems to be in a very unique spot, where it's surrounded in very close quarters by people who are, if not past enemies that they may have a peace agreement with or a normalization agreement with, they're populated by active enemies of Israel. So they look at these trends as to what are we going to do? How are we going to handle this situation? So this one almost, the votes needs its own topic of talk. But here's just some bullet points from that report. The northern arena is Israel's primary military challenge, intensified by the following: the Shiite axis led by Iran. And you can see the colors on the map there that they use to show who's Lebanon, Syria, Iraq, and Iran. Iran land bridge from Tehran to Lebanon, and they're still working on that. Friction between the Axis and Israel. The Northern War will be different and more difficult than its predecessors. It'll be multi-front, missile drone on civilian areas, and harm to Israel's economy. There is some pessimism in some parts that the war will result in mass casualties at a level never before seen in Israel in conflicts. They've lost many, many thousands of soldiers in these conflicts that they've had since they were founded as a nation and refounded as a nation in 1948. But it's been difficult. It's been a difficult space. There are thousands of soldiers have lost their lives fighting in these wars. Thousands of Arabs have died in these wars. But the concern is that, by and large, civilian populations have not been lost in those wars. And what will be the result in a country of under 10 million people, where a significant number, 250, 300,000 people might die in some of these missile attacks? So the IDF is taking this all very, very seriously. They look at U.S. military assistance How's that going right now with the new administration? How is Russia involved? What's the exit strategy? Here's a quote from the article. The war scenario suggests that Israel will find it difficult to bring about a quick end to fighting or to terminate it at a time or in the circumstances that it would like without defeating Hezbollah. Therefore, Israel should bring about an end to the war by exacting a heavy price from Lebanon and from Syria by attacking infrastructures. That's interesting. If that war starts, how is Israel going to respond? I seem to remember a prophecy in Isaiah chapter 17 talking about the destruction of Damascus. Is it hard to believe, and not every Bible prophecy, premillennial Bible prophecy guy thinks that Isaiah 17 is still future. I do. I think if you look at verses like Isaiah chapter 17, verse 9, seems to indicate that passage that the IDF will be involved and that it will take place at night. So when do you see all these bombing runs going to the suburbs around Damascus and other places in Syria? They almost all take place at night. You see the pictures of the explosion. You see the videos. There's hundreds of videos that get put up on Twitter about these attacks. So the report continues, offensive actions of this nature are likely to lead to international pressure for an immediate end to hostilities. It is imperative that Israel demand during negotiations to end the war the creation of stability and inspection mechanisms that will prevent the rebuilding of the offensive capabilities of Hezbollah, Iran, and its proxies in the region, Lebanon, Syria, and Western Iraq. Now, one way to negotiate that end result is to really destroy those areas. You understand that. And I think some of the statements by the Israeli Air Force, people from, I think it was at the Herzliya conference a few years ago, the head of the IAF, the Israeli Air Force at the time said, listen, you're going to see shock and awe like you've never seen if we have to go in there. It's not going to take 6 weeks, 36 days, or whatever. It's going to be done in 48 to 72 hours. So they're planning on this. The topmost demand should be for an agreement that can enforce the dismantling of Hezbollah as an independent militia, or at least block all arms transfer routes from Iran to Syria and Lebanon and remove the military capabilities of Iran and its proxies from Lebanon to Syria. Very interesting. Now I'm going to come back to that in just a moment, but I'm going to swerve off into a little bit of a, I don't know how long this will take. I found it very interesting. It involves history and family trees and stuff that I kind of really geek out over. And this was the coup attempt or attempt at destabilizing Jordan. Now, Jordan is a very, very important country to Israel. The peace agreement that they have with Jordan is very important to Israel's security. The longest border that Israel has is its border with Jordan. But there are various actors that are trying to destabilize Jordan. 70% of Jordan are termed Palestinian refugees. More about that in a moment. So we had this coup attempt, destabilization attempt, whatever you want to call it, appears to have involved former Crown Prince Hamza. It led Queen Noor, who is the mother of the former Crown Prince, to do this tweet. She's American-born, Syrian-American, converted to Islam when she married King Hussein. She was his fourth wife. And since King Hussein died 22 years ago, she has maintained her presence there. And she tweeted this. This was, I think, the only public statement that she's made, praying that truth and justice will prevail for all the innocent victims of this wicked slander. God bless and keep them safe. Now, the victim in this case is her son, Prince Hamza. There were reports, this is from Israel Hayom newspaper, this is from Al-Gad newspaper in Jordan, talking about, we put down the coup attempt, everything is safe, we've got everything done. They arrested, or at least put them under house arrest, King Abdullah II has said, listen, he's under my protection, my brother, my half-brother. But they've had other people, 18 or 20 people, some in sort of dramatic, very staged raids around the country, like 20 cars surrounding a guy in the desert in the Jordan Valley to arrest him. They've been charged. So it comes very interesting. This is this morning's Al Ghad newspaper in Jordan, celebrating the 100th anniversary of the founding of the Hashemite kingdom of Jordan. It's always interesting the way history sort of operates in these cycles. So here's the article at the top of the page on the left. Says this: Prince Hamza has contacted foreign and opposition figures in Jordan with a view toward undermining the stability of the government and the royal house. Jordanian Foreign Minister Ayem Spadi accused him today at a press conference following the night of arrest. The Jordanian Foreign Minister said that the suspicions against Prince Hamza and his conspirators to carry out an alleged coup are very serious. He further claimed that the prince's wife had contacted a foreign source that a plane would land and take them abroad. Queen Noor wrote the tweet that I showed you. There were military vehicles, roads shut off in the capital of Amman, Jordan. A very interesting city, a city, I don't know, when we were there, I don't think I saw anything over 6 or 7 stories tall, and it's a city of over 4 million people. About half the country of Jordan, which is about 10 million people, live in the immediate vicinity of Amman. Jordan is one of the most water, if not the most water-challenged country on the planet. I have friends who live there, and they say, you have a cistern, they fill it up at the beginning of the month, and if you run out, you run out. So you got to ration your showers. None of these, like you see on HGTV, the 18 shower jets and rainfall shower heads and dual shower heads, all this stuff. Doesn't happen in Amman because water is such a problem. There are a number of directions I can go with this, but it's very interesting. The rise of the Hashemite kingdom of Jordan resulted from their fall in the kingdom of Hijaz, which was the area in the western part of Saudi Arabia, which would include the areas of Mecca and Medina, the holy cities of Mecca and Medina, and the area of modern day where Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman wants to build that city called Neom. So the sheriff of Mecca, as he was called, became the king of the Hashemite kingdom of Jordan. That was in 1921. That was at the time that the world government, the League of Nations and others, and there was a conference called the San Remo Conference, were trying to decide how do we have the Jewish people, Israeli people, have returned from around the world to their ancient homeland. How are we going to divide this up? When that was done at the San Remo Conference in 1920 and 21, and then by the League of Nations in 1922, they decided on a two-state solution. The Zionists would be given the land west of the Jordan River. This is the map from the Mandate for Palestine, July 24th, 1922. Jewish Palestine, because it had been called Palestine since about 135 AD, when the Romans put down the Bar Kokhba rebellion in Israel. So they called it Palestine because it was sort of like Philistine, it was insulting, and that's the name it took. Everybody used it, all the maps say it. But so this is the map that they had: Jewish Palestine, didn't call it Israel yet, and Transjordan. And it says there, Arab Palestine. This is what everybody agreed to. This was approved by the world. There was a two-state solution. Now what they want Jordan And they want to divide Jewish Palestine into 3 parts. So they don't want a 2-state solution. They don't want a 3-state solution. They want a 4-state solution. And they want to reduce the Jewish part, the Zionist part, to indefensible borders. So anyway, so the Hashemites were given the Transjordan. Here is another family tree. So you see Hussein, the sheriff of Mecca, from November, and the king of Hijaz. He ruled from November 1908 to October 1924. Then his son Abdullah I, right below him, was the king of Jordan, 1921 to 1951. He was assassinated on the Temple Mount in 1951. At the time he was assassinated, he was in the range of the assassination attempt was his grandson, who we know as King Hussein I, the king of Jordan. It's interesting that other members of that family, they became the king of Hijaz, the king of Jordan, the king of Syria, and eventually one of them became the king of Iraq. So the Hashemite family, they claim to be direct descendants of the Prophet Muhammad. King Abdullah II is the 42nd generation from Muhammad. This is what they say. I have no reason to doubt that this is accurate. So King Abdullah I of Jordan had a son named Talal. He became king when King Abdullah I was assassinated on the Temple Mount. He wasn't very popular. The British didn't really care for him. This would have been sort of in the range of the time when Queen Elizabeth was ascending to the throne. I'm sure you saw Prince Philip passed away this week at the age of 99, married to Queen Elizabeth for 73 years. She will celebrate next year, I think, her 70th anniversary as Queen of England. It's only Queen of England, only Royal of England in my lifetime. Now, I'm getting up there. So Talal, wasn't very popular. They said he was mentally ill. He got sent to Beirut or Damascus, exiled. And King Hussein, who was then about 17 years old, took over as king. He ruled until 1999. His eldest son is Abdullah II, who has reigned since King Hussein died 22 years ago. Here's another, you can find this this is from the Hashemite Kingdom of Jordan website. Very interesting. It's just interesting, the interplay. Here, I'll give you an example of this. So, King Hussein had originally named a prince. Some people I've seen suggest that this prince might be the Antichrist. King Hussein said, listen, you're going to have important things to do in the future. I'm going to make my eldest son the crown prince, King Abdullah. And he did, and he died 3 weeks later. A lot of people speculate what happened if he died a week later or 4 weeks later. Things might have been different. Wasn't necessarily the popular move. When King Abdullah became king, he made, to honor his father, the guy on the lower right, Hamza, the eldest son of Queen Noor, King Hussein's fourth wife, her eldest son, Hamza, who looks very much like his father did, very charismatic, much more politically adept, I think, than his half-brother, King Abdullah. Very somewhat popular in Jordan, not afraid to speak his mind. Now maybe he went a little bit too far. So King Hussein had 4 wives. His second wife was the mother of King Abdullah. Then Hussein eventually married Queen Noor. She was American-born. Very, I think she had training she was in the first female class at Princeton. She's very smart. Several inches taller than her husband. I don't think King Abdullah is he's not a very tall guy. She had Hamza and some others. Hussein's third wife was Queen Aliyah, and she had 3 children. She had Haya, and I'll talk about her in just a moment, Abdullah married Queen Rania. Now, Abdullah II has been very pro-Palestinian. One, there's a practical side to that. 70% of the population are Palestinian Arabs, refugees. They still live in refugee camps to this day. These camps are small. One of the largest, this is one from Damascus, Syria. These were all set up in 1948 during the War of Independence. The Arabs fled. They were said, just leave for 5 days, we'll beat Israel, and you can come back. Well, that didn't happen. They lost. This is Yarmouk. This is a fairly recent picture of Yarmouk and within the city limits of Damascus. You can see it's a very densely populated area. It's been effectively destroyed. There were hundreds of thousands of people who lived here. Here was a day when the UN was passing out food back during the Syrian civil war. And this is the squalor that in Arab countries, the Palestinian Arabs have lived in. I talked to one from Gaza at that Christ at the Checkpoint conference I was at, and I said, you complain about Israel, why don't you do something? Why don't you ever complain about this? The Jordanian refugee camps are like this. And so Abdullah has to rule with, I wouldn't call it an iron fist, but a pretty strong one, and he can't do anything pro-Israel because the Palestinians there hate Israel. When we were there, we had a Palestinian guide, 1995, and the Palestinian guide got on the bus one day and said, I hear tomorrow you're going to the western parts. I think I said to him, I'm going to Israel. Is that what you mean by the western parts? And you can't find a map in Jordan, at least you couldn't back in those days, that had Israel on it. So Queen Rania, Abdullah's wife, is a Palestinian. So now there's claims that Saudi Arabia is somehow involved in this. This is one article from the New York Times this morning, another one from the Tehran Times, and they're saying Israel was involved, the Mossad was involved, Saudi Arabia is involved. And the New York Times article, it sort of says, they have a subheadline that, this meddling by Saudi Arabia, but they don't really give much evidence of that. There is some evidence, though. One of the things that happened was, one of the guys who was arrested was a guy named Abdullah. He was the finance minister of the Kingdom of Jordan for a number of years. He was also the head of the royal court. He has dual Saudi and Jordanian citizenship. This happens a lot in this area, and you'll see why in just a moment. So here is and so when he was arrested, the foreign minister of Saudi Arabia hightailed it to Amman and had a meeting with the foreign minister of the Kingdom of Jordan saying, hey, we want Abdullah to be, Abdullah, I guess is his name, to be released. And here he is at a conference, the Future Investment Initiative conference in 2017 or 2018 in Saudi Arabia. He is also a financial advisor to Mohammed bin Salman. So there's this tension where the belief in Jordan is that, in Israel, among many people, that the Saudis want to take over the custodian of the Temple Mount in an effort to eventually give it back to Israel, because the Saudis have also pushed a social media campaign saying, hey, we don't really have a connection to the Temple Mount. And there's a historical basis for that. Talked about that a few weeks ago. So there was also a report that the Saudis refused to take off from the airport to go home until Ad-Waldallah was released. He was never released and they went home, but they made a big show of coming there and saying, we want this guy released. They also came out and said, we support the Kingdom of Jordan and everything. Now, I'm a little bit skeptical of that claim because of all the other things going on and the divorce from the Palestinians that has taken place in much of the Gulf Coast states. So here's a picture at that conference. You see Mohammed bin Salman there in the middle, and you also see this guy. He is Sheikh Mohammed bin Rashid Al Maktoum, I'm sure, Toom of Dubai. He's the leader of Dubai, the great city that's been built. The inset picture there is Jordan Princess Haya. That's his wife, was his wife, the sixth wife that he had. And he violated the rule. The sixth wife is the one that always causes you trouble. This is based on not personal study, but just looking at history. The king in Israel, England, he had some problems, particularly when he got up to around wives 6, 7, and 8. Anyway, she was born to the third wife, Princess Aliyah or Queen Aliyah of Jordan. And Queen Aliyah was very loved by King Hussein, but she died in a helicopter crash when Haya was 2. So Haya ended up married to the head of Dubai. And I think you'll understand why in just a minute, because they have a certain lifestyle that they have to maintain. Jordan's a very poor country. The average per capita income in Jordan is like $4,500 per year. Israel, it's 10 times that amount on average. So very, very poor, except in the royal family and the elites. There's also reports that the sheikh from the United Arab Emirates has been buying land through people in East Jerusalem and trying to undermine the Jordanian king. The divorce between Princess Haya and the sheikh was very bitter. She took their 2 children, fled to London, and it was the fodder of the British tabloids for quite a while. The judge issued about a 34-page scathing decision essentially in favor of Princess Haya, who's an equestrian. She was on the Jordanian Olympic team. And one of the reasons she was upset was because she understood that the sheikh had offered their 13-year-old daughter to be a future bride of the guy sitting to the right of the king, Mohammed bin Salman. So you can kind of see how they're all they're intermarried like European royalty. This is just the Middle East part. So, this is King Abdullah of Jordan. He does these things. This is at the Washington Institute for Near East Policy, but he always says this is how he talks about Israel. This is from a conference a couple years ago.
And that cannot happen without a two-state solution that provides real peace in accord with international law and UN resolutions, an end to the conflict, a viable, independent, sovereign Palestinian state on the June 4th, 1967 lines, with East Jerusalem as its capital, but living side by side with Israel in mutual peace and security.
It's a Sochi conference in Russia.
A deep and shared concern for all of us is safeguarding Jerusalem, its holy sites and the historic Muslim and Christian presence in the city.
And this is what he does. Whenever he talks about Jerusalem, and this is why I think if Genesis 12, I'll bless them who bless you and curse them who curse you, the more that he does this, he's going to have problems. And so he's continually doing this, saying the Muslim and Christian holy sites in Jerusalem. He never mentions Jewish holy sites, even though there's a lot of history there that's showing up. Now, back at that conference, the Future Investment Conference back in Saudi Arabia, you see there, this is the head of Bahrain, or the Bahrain foreign minister, I can't remember which. That is Prime Minister Hariri of Lebanon and Mohammed bin Salman. Now, this was after Hariri had gone to Riyadh and been arrested by Mohammed bin Salman, held for 4 to 6 weeks, and eventually coughed up, rumors say, $7 to $8 billion, because he's very, very wealthy, to Mohammed bin Salman. He was essentially in prison. And I've showed you the videos of that. He looked very disheveled. He went back, he resigned, but then he brought back, and then he's been back, and Lebanon's melting down anyway. And then there was this moment in the conference. Here, look at the beginning of this conference. This Future Investment Initiative, Saudi Arabia has been pushing the world to invest in Saudi Arabia. You know, they're going to do jobs. And then one of the things they talk about here is their 2030 Sustainable Development Goals, which is really what the UN does. And then there was this exchange. You don't need to turn the sound up on that. The finance minister, the head of the royal court, asked Mohammed bin Salman, well, what about this Khashoggi thing? And so this is Crown Prince bin Salman giving an answer. This was, in front of every big crowd in Saudi Arabia. They asked Hariri some questions, and then Mohammed bin Salman said, well, listen, this time you're going to get to go home. Ha, ha, ha. But I guess everything is okay. So the thing has been quelled, but there are some real-world problems. Queen Rania of Jordan, the Palestinian wife of King Abdullah, has a bit of a spending issue. The word is, from different press reports that I've in my research, she has spent hundreds of millions of dollars on clothes, shoes, and handbags. Hundreds of millions. Now you're thinking, now wait a minute, I thought Jordan was a poor country, right? Yeah, it is for most people. The other report that I read this morning was that King Abdullah, a former member of the Royal Court Financial Affairs, this comes from a report in Geopolitical Futures, a former member of the Royal Court Financial Affairs Department said the Queen spends about $2 million every year on shoes, bags, and briefcases. Where does she get that money? Apparently, the Hashemite kingdom has some money for the royal family. He adds that the king earns more than $2 billion every year from his investments in the U.S., Japan, and the United Kingdom, in addition to his alleged illicit revenues from Jordan. Hamza doesn't like this, and Hamza's upset in part. He's fluent in speaking Arabic. His brother was raised mainly in boarding schools in England, in the Royal Military Academy, so he's not the best at speaking in Arabic. He's more military-oriented, and Hamza is very well-schooled, very articulate, and he's been hanging out with the Bedouin tribes that sort of formed the backbone. It's a very tribal society, and he's very popular among these. So this is the Jordan's existential dilemma. Very interesting article in Geopolitical Futures. It says here, it is therefore unlikely that Hamza's ideals are the driving force behind his opposition to Abdullah. He understands the workings of Jordanian society, knows how polarized the country is, and though he may be sincere in his calls for reforms, there's little doubt that he wants recognition and direct political involvement in Jordan's politics. And so Abdullah is in a very precarious position. He does not know exactly what to do. Now, biblically, where this comes up is, this is from the 9th century BC, the time of the divided kingdom, and that those shaded areas, colored areas, show the kingdom of Judah, the southern kingdom, the northern kingdom of Israel, and the areas of Ammon, Moab, and Edom. And within Ammon, you can see the city of Ammon. And Ammon is about 38 to 40 miles directly east of Jerusalem, about the same latitude. And it's interesting because when you're in Ammon, it is very brown. It's shades of brown and dust and dirt and rock. You approach the Jordan Valley and it's lush and green, and that continues on into Israel, where they planted millions and millions of trees since Israel came back as a country. And it's interesting, they're 40 miles apart, but they're totally different. They're not even close. And part of this is from the prophetic standpoint. In Daniel chapter 11, it talks about the Antichrist. He shall enter also into the glorious land, and many countries shall be overthrown, but these shall escape out of his hand, even Edom and Moab and the chief of the children of Ammon. And so the question is, how is this going to play out in Bible prophecy? We don't know. The one thing we do know is that the peace agreement with Jordan is very important. It's Israel's longest border with a neighboring country. And the Jordan Valley, as you can see from this sort of three-dimensional map, showing the Dead Sea at 1,300 feet below sea level, and then the highest mountain there at 3,300 feet above sea level. So you're talking almost a mile elevation change, and that's like a wall along the Jordan Valley that is a natural barrier to invasion, but Israel has to control the lowland around the Jordan Valley. At the same time that this is going on, a memo came out, was leaked to the national newspaper in the United Arab Emirates, that America government under Biden was trying to reset their relations with the Palestinians, and the administration came out this week and said, hey, we're releasing $235 billion to the Palestinians. Everything that Trump did to cut off the Palestinians and the UN organizations, UN NGOs, Biden is undoing. Because he wants to do this peace agreement, right? And he thinks this is going to give me, they're going to want to sit down and negotiate with me. Like, that's going to change their desire to get rid of Israel. At the same time this is going on, this is just wars and rumors of wars. I won't even talk about what's going on with Russia and Ukraine. I will just say that there are some things happening there. I'll talk about that in just a moment. So in Turkey, Erdogan has become weak politically. So he's now becoming sort of pro-Western, pro-European, backing off a little bit on his claims on the Eastern Mediterranean. But then there were 104 retired admirals. I don't know if they have 104 ships in the Turkish Navy, but they had 104 admirals that came out in a letter and said, we oppose Erdogan's desire to build this canal. You see the Bosporus there that goes there between really Europe and Asia. Istanbul straddles that. And that's a very important waterway because that's the only, until they got the ports in Syria, that were the only warm water ports that Russia had that were year-round. But they got to go through this very narrow strait. It's sort of like the Suez Canal. It's a little wider than the Suez Canal. But somebody sinks a ship in there and you can have problems. So he wants to build this canal. The admirals come out and said, this will violate international treaties. Then Erdogan, he kind of, well, I support the international treaties, but these guys are being treasonous, and he had them all rounded up. And this is what Erdogan does. If he doesn't like what you're saying, if you oppose him, he rounds you up. He also met with the head of the EU and the EU foreign minister this week. This was led to kind of an interesting exchange. They're calling it Sofagate. So what happened was this female head of the EU, they show up at I think this was at the palace in Ankara. Yeah, this is Erdogan's 900-room palace that he built in Ankara. because, you never know when you're going to need those extra 200 bedrooms, right? When the family comes over. Because I don't know if they intermarry like they do there, but anyway. So here they come into the meeting. There's Ataturk's picture in the meeting hall. And, we only have 2 chairs. So we're going to sit down and talk now about EU-Turkish relations. And and she's like, well, wait, where's my chair? Now, well, you get to sit on the sofa. So they're calling it Sofagate. So it's just kind of an interesting aside. In Israel, real quickly, they have received a new plane. It's a surveillance jet. It combines 2 aircraft's missions into a single airframe. It has sensors, radar. I think it's an update. I can't remember the name of the flight. Of the plane. It's a Grumman 550 built in Long Beach that they had that can jam radar. It's an incredible thing. So they took delivery of that this week. You might remember back in 2007, there was a North Korean designed and built nuclear reactor in the area along the Euphrates River up in Syria around Dar al-Zor called Al-Kibar. And what happened was they took that 550 plane built in Long Beach that they had outfitted with special radar, and they took 2 jets, gave them external fuel tanks, and they flew up the Mediterranean coast across southern Turkey, dropped their exterior fuel tanks in Turkey, flew down along the Euphrates River and bombed and destroyed that facility there. Otherwise, if they had not done that, Assad might have, or ISIS might have had, nuclear reactor and nuclear weapons. And here's the September of 2007, here's the Jerusalem Post headlines, and it talks about, this is from the Turkish paper at the same time, look, here's the fuel tanks. So very interesting thing. Also, a report this week that came out based on something that happened in September 2020, just to know that they're preparing for war in the north. Israel came out and they said, look, we have a group up in the Golan, and they have gone into and done operations in Syria. Physical, on-the-ground operations. Very interesting. And here's some pictures from this. It's called the 12th Battalion of the Golani Brigade. And so this information has been released this week. And I talked about that last week. This is the Iran-China thing. Russia is making moves in Ukraine. I have a picture. No, this is the Kiev Post the other day. Vladimir Putin, killer on the loose. That's from a Ukraine newspaper, obviously. So they've sort of picked up on Biden's theme. This is a map. It's very complicated. There are ethnic Russians that live in Ukraine. And here's a train. There are 10,000 Russian tanks. There are about 100,000 troops massed on both, divided up between both sides of the border. There have been trenches dug. The interesting thing is that Erdogan had a phone call with Putin to talk about the situation there. And he's also had a meeting with Zelensky, the head of Ukraine, the next day, and they're talking about transferring drones. Good article by Jonathan Spire in the Jerusalem Post on Friday, The Ravaging of Afrin. You need to get a hold of that and read it about what Erdogan has been doing through his Syrian jihadist-backed militias. The other thing that's happened that's, I think, significant, well, it's all significant, or I wouldn't have made a slide about it. That's sort of my test. Now, you have Mansour Abbas, who's maybe going to be brought into the coalition to make Netanyahu prime minister in the election. This is Dr. Kadar has an article about, listen, if you do that, you will complete the Lebanization process of Israeli politics. And that's not a good thing. So Israel's I think it's very fragile right now in some respects. There was this attack on a ship in between Eritrea and Yemen, an Iranian ship. Israel attacked it. Israel admitted that they attacked it. And it turns out, everybody says, oh, isn't this terrible? Israel attacked this. This ship was just transporting cargo. Now, this ship's been in the same general area for years. It has on its deck, it has gunboats, machine guns, cranes to put the boats in the water. It's a spy ship. So Israel attacked it, and so there's a lot of, so there's these negotiations going on between the U.S. and Israel. So the Biden administration releases information about Israel attacking Iranian ships that are delivering oil, smuggling oil to Syria to get money to fund their terror operations in Iraq and elsewhere in Yemen and cause problems. So that's released, and I think I'm trying to think like the Biden, I'm assuming they think, I don't know if they think things through. They just did it because they thought, well, this will give us some leverage with Iran, and they'll come in and they'll be very willing to negotiate with us. Now, Haaretz, they had a pretty good article the other day. They said, this seems like an escalation to us, the attack on the Iranian ship. Why didn't they just let it go? It's been there for years. Well, one of the reasons they let it go was because the Biden administration had released things to the Wall Street Journal. Then when Israel attacked, it was leaked to the New York Times, probably by the Biden administration, that Israel was the ones who did the attack on the Iranian ship. And all of this was to try to give the Biden administration leverage in the negotiations with Iran. This is how they stumble through geopolitics. It's idiotic. Caroline Glick would have some very choice words to say about this. I'm sure she's written on it. And we have all these anti-Israel people that have been put in places in our in our State Department that just do not like Israel. So this is all that's going on. There was a 10-year celebration of the Iron Dome. Danny Gantz got up and said, listen, we're ready to fight everywhere and anywhere. This report just this morning, just before I came up here, Natanz, remember there was an attack on Natanz a couple months ago that pretty much really set back the Iranian centrifuge program. Iran reconstituted it, and this morning there was what the Iranians are calling an accident. What information leaked from the Mossad is we took it out. We took out the Natanz facility. So you'll probably hear from Iran that this was a explosion of sewer gas that had backed up, but don't believe it. I'll talk about this more in the future. This was in the New York Times a week or two ago. In their arts and leisure section, and the title of the article is A Fake or Biblical Gold. And it's about a manuscript that a person had over 100 years ago had come out and said, hey, I have an original copy of Deuteronomy. And there's a lot of politics and archaeology. He was in London, the British Museum. They called him a fake and a fraud. And here, there's pictures of plates these are drawings that people had made. The thing is lost now, and so everybody said this was a forgery, this was fake, but now a scholar has been looking and he says, you know what, I think that might have actually been an original or pretty close to an original of Deuteronomy. That would be a shocking, stunning discovery. This is from the New York Times archives, and they talked about Mr. Shapira. That was the name of the guy who found it. Here's what it looked like. They had to enhance it, and then this is what it looked like after they did some work on it. And Punch in September 8th, 1883, they put up this article, Mr. Shapira on the right, and you can see the anti-Semitic, anti-Jewish character of the cartoon. So this is, this is the Moabite stone, which is from, I think 500 or 600 BC. That's at the Louvre in Paris. A very important archaeological find establishing biblical history. Netanyahu gave a speech at the Holocaust Day remembrance thing the other day. And essentially said, we won't cooperate with the ICC. This court seeks to investigate Israel on the basis of the ludicrous claim that our soldiers and commanders, whose morality is unrivaled, supposedly carried out war crimes, while they fight cruel terrorist groups who carry out war crimes daily. Israeli soldiers contend with proxies of the death-dealing Iran. He also went on to say that the nuclear deal with Iran threatens our destruction and will not obligate us, and we will fight it. So, do you have like 5 or 6 minutes? I could go 15, but I'll just do, I'm trying to decide which one. The Yad Vashem in Jerusalem, if you have to go there if you go to Israel, it's obligatory. It is a crushing, mentally crushing experience. You walk through the children's memorial, and all you see is little points of light representing the over 1 million children slaughtered by the Nazis in the Holocaust. There are not many of the Holocaust survivors still alive. They had a number of them speak. I'll share some each week now. You can go to the Yad Vashem YouTube channel and find the ceremony. Okay, I'll play this lady. I think her name is Helena. Where is I'm missing, oh, there it is. This is translated. It has, she was born in Lodz, Poland. When the war broke out, her family fled to Warsaw. When they sealed us in the Warsaw ghetto, I was 6. After a while, there was nothing to eat, and outside people lay looking like skeletons. These are actual pictures. My parents and my uncle were given documents and worked in a factory. The Germans announced they were opening a kindergarten for the workers' children, and all the children would get 2 meals. Milk and meat. She's in her 90s now, I believe. People were convinced and sent their children to the kindergarten. One day they put us in a garden and lined us up. Suddenly people appeared and started firing a machine gun. I lay among the dead children. I was terrified. Night fell. And I got up and walked home. She was 6. Jews were gathered before their deportation to Treblinka. When everybody was forced to leave the houses, during the action that took place, there were thousands of people, children and elderly, standing there. And my father put me inside a big duffel bag and hoped to get me through. But they realized it wouldn't work. There was a bakery across from us. My mother happened to know them. She took me and my grandfather, and he went into a place filled with flour and hid among the sacks. At night, my mother returned with a wagoner and took us. Righteous among the nations smuggled this lady and her family out of the ghetto and housed them in the bunker under his parents' home. While escaping to the Polish side, my mother was caught, and I never saw her again. She's a child.
כשהיה המרד בגטו, כל
Then we know what happened in the Warsaw Ghetto.
זה כל כך עצוב ומפחיד.
She was there. It was sad and frightening. The Warsaw Polish uprising broke out.
גם שמענו אותו, מפני שכל הקרב היה מעלינו.
We heard it because the battle was taking place above us. Helena and her family were hidden in the bunker and eventually were liberated by the Red Army. She came to Israel in 1950 and got married.
בעלי היה גם ניצול שואה. נולדו לנו 3 ילדים. גל היה הבן הצעיר שלנו, ובגיל 19 נפטר מסרטן. התנדבתי לאיראן במשך 35 שנה. הרגשתי שאני יכולה להבין את הכאב של בני אדם. יש לי 7 נכדים וגם 5 נינים. רק כשהילדים גדלו נהיינו משפחה. אני יושבת ואני חושבת, היום אני לא יתומה.
תעלה המשואה.
המשמר יבוא לדור, משמר עודו, המשמר יבוא לנוח, עמוד נוח.
And there's a story, I have 2 or 3 others of these that we could watch, but I'll play them in the future. You can go to the website, and I would highly recommend that you do that. It's in the middle of the ceremony after President Rivlin and Prime Minister Netanyahu speak. It's quite moving. Another lady, she's there at 94. She testified about how she heard her mother shot. She says, I still have nightmares. So what was she, 13, 14 at the time? As you leave the Yad Vashem, very interesting. You walk, so you've just gone through weaving back and forth through death and cruelty. And then you see this. Doug Hershey has done a book called Israel Rising. I would highly recommend that you get it. Very well done. And Doug, who I've met, did an excellent job. What he did was he went to different places around Israel, got the exact position of the camera, that took old photographs. Like, you see the Temple Mount here, right? It doesn't look like Jerusalem is that much. But this is what it looks like today. So you walk up the ramp and you see rebuilt Jerusalem. The ceremony at Yad Vashem closed with this.
משמר ידגל תזכור, דגשק.
כל עוד ברבע בנימה נפש יהודי הומיה ולפת מזרח קדימה עין לציון צופיה עוד לא אבדה תקוותנו התקווה בת שנות 2000 להיות עם חופשי בארצנו ארץ ציון וירושלים להיות עם חופשי בארצנו ארץ ציון וירושלים.
They rearranged the celebrations this year, Holocaust Remembrance Day, when the entire sirens will sound and the entire country will come to a halt for 2 minutes at noon. It's a very moving thing to see. Next week they will celebrate the independence of Israel. I won't go through the scripture. I've read it many times, but I would recommend that you go home this afternoon and you read Ezekiel chapter 36, where God says, listen, you people, you were in the land, you played the harlot, and you disobeyed, and I scattered you among the nations. And when you went out, I'm paraphrasing, when you went out into the nations, you did it again. You disobeyed me. But I made a promise. And I'm going to bring you back. You don't deserve it, but I'm going to bring you back to this land. And the initial gathering will be in unbelief because the scripture then says, and then I will give you a new heart, a heart of flesh, and you will know that I am God. So we're in the middle of that. Anyway, go read Ezekiel 36 and tell me that there's no God of Israel and God of the church who reached out to us when we didn't deserve it and gave us the gift of his son. So we're in process of this thing wrapping up, I think. You saw a lot of evidence of that today. But there is, the song that was there was Haktikva, the hope. Boy, let's pray. Lord, thanks for the promise of your word. Pray you'll give us opportunities to share the truth and wonder of your prophetic word in the glorious gospel of Jesus Christ this week. In Jesus' name, amen.